Karen Woods joins us now from Toronto. She's a senior associate with Solstice Public Affairs there. She also is active in the Chinese community, writes for two influential Chinese newspapers. What sticks with me, Karen, watching Stephanie's story, the Shanghai miracle is how it's described, and I don't think many people know this story.
You're correct. This part of history was not told by many. So Shanghai was actually in the middle of a political anomaly during the Second World War because the control of the city was split between the then beleaguered Republic of China and increasingly militaristic Japan, France, Britain and United States. It actually did not require a visa for any foreigners to land in China. So Shanghai sort of become this natural landing area or landing spot for thousands and thousands of Jewish refugees fleeing persecutions from Eastern Europe.
There's also this interesting parallel, isn't there, that, about the suffering during World War II with the deaths of the innocent Jews in the Holocaust and the deaths of innocent Chinese as a result of the Nanjing massacre. Talk to us about that.
That is correct. It's so interesting you brought it up because we often say, for the wrong reason, it's all about the bodies you recognize, but it shouldn't be the case because 300,000 innocent Chinese civilians were murdered by the Japanese army in 1937. And to this day, Japan still routinely denies its crime. So I think it's very important we have a comprehensive Holocaust education because it is truly about never again.
Talk to me about the lasting message. What do we take away from what happened in Shanghai? These people coming to the aid of Jews who obviously would have perished if they'd stayed behind.
Well, I think the Chinese people and the Jewish people have long shared a history of friendship, collaboration, and this just goes even further to show that Shanghai was a very multicultural, diverse, and most importantly, open city in the early 1920s, and it was called the Pearl of the Orient after all. And let's not forget some of the most powerful Jewish family, such as the Sassoons and the Hardoons, they emerged in Shanghai, and their business empire grew because of this sort of pro-business, business-friendly environment Shanghai cultivated. And I think on the second part of this is that we have to keep on educating our children about the horrible historic events that happened during the World War II, that we cannot forget the 6 million Jewish lives lost during the Holocaust. And we have to remember the equally important lesson in Nanjing that 300,000 of our countrymen were slain, and we have to honor the victims and their family members.
And you know, in Stephanie's profile, you hear from this woman who was obviously spent some rather formative years of her life there in China, who wants to get back to Shanghai. I imagine a lot of the populace did disperse and go elsewhere, but what about the still lasting message there in terms of the people who stayed on in Shanghai? Were there a lot of Jews who remained, or did they kind of disperse and go elsewhere after the Second World War?
Well, after the Second World War, when the State of Israel was formed, some of them immigrated to Israel, and then President Truman at the time had a second affidavit support policy where, if you are a Jewish person and you have a relative in the States, you can immigrate to the States. So a majority of those Jewish refugees did leave Shanghai and went to the United States. But I want to point out to our viewer that the Shanghai government is actually working very hard to restore some of the historical buildings in the Jewish area. For example, I do know a synagogue was restored 3 years ago. Actually, several rabbinical delegation group from Israel actually brought the Torah there, and it was a very moving ceremony. So I would suggest anyone who's visiting Shanghai, do check out the new Shanghai Jewish Refugee Museum. It's a very important piece of history that everybody should get familiar with.